saying, "Don't look now, but your fly is open." There's another fly story. Let's see, she was at a party in New York, and there was a macho-type man who had been ignored by Tallulah, just completely cut off, and he was infuriated that she would do this to him. So he thought, okay, I'll do this to her. So he stepped behind the couch where she was seated, unzipped his fly, took out his cock, put it on her shoulder, and said, "Do you know what this is?" And Miss Bankhead looked and said, "Well, it looks like a cock, but smaller." I guess he didn't try any other stories with Tallulah. The voice, I wish I could do it. I just can't. It was so deep, so explosive, growls and grunts, and really quite basso. A newspaper reporter had interviewed her on the telephone, and he was known for having a rather high voice, a thin, high voice. And at the end of his interview, he said, "Now is my chance to get in my dig." So he said, "Tell me one thing more, Miss Bankhead. Whenever you answer the telephone, are you mistaken for a man?" And she said, "No, are you?" There's the time also when she was living in a New York hotel. She got in the elevator late one night to go up to her floor, but a very dark and handsome young man got on the elevator and stood quite next to her, and she was smitten by the whole sudden look of this thing, and her heart began to pound, and she began to put on lipstick and stand a little closer, and she was thinking, wherever he gets off, I'm going to get off, because if we get off on the same floor, something is going to happen, I'm sure. Something will be bound to happen. Well, the elevator operator stopped at her floor, which came first, and she ignored it. She's just concentrating on this man standing there, sending out all the energy she could, and it seemed to be working. But after a long pause, the elevator operator said, "This is your floor, Miss Bankhead." So, my dear, she rose to her height. She stepped off and swung around at the elevator operator and said, "There goes your Christmas present, Buster." I like that one. Then once on Fifth Avenue, she was walking along in her mink coat with her dark glasses. The street was rather crowded, and she ran head-on into a gentleman. They both stopped and gave that sort of change of embarrassment and an apology. And stepping aside, they both stepped the same way. So they were still confronting each other. You know how that thing can happen. So then they stepped again to the other side, but both, so that they still couldn't pass. Once more, they both stepped to the other side, at which point Tallulah said, "One more time, darling, then I really must go." Well, I could go on and on. There's so many stories, and they really were true. If you ever were with her for a 3-minute session, you knew that these stories had to all be true. I want to tell you about the first time I met her in the flesh. The shock was just incredible. It was a Sunday afternoon luncheon given by Giancarlo Menotti out at his place in Mount Kisco, New York. And I knew that she was a neighbor. I knew she knew him, but I had no idea that she was coming to this luncheon. I had talked to her 2 or 3 times on the telephone, but as I say, I didn't know who was coming. People began to arrive, and we were all out on the side terrace. There were chairs out there and couches, and a bar, of course. And celebrities were coming right and left, you know, people from the theater, people from the dance world, people from the music world, you know. Martha Graham arrived very beautifully in a tight pongee dress suit sort of affair, you know. She chose to sit alone with her back very straight and her cheeks pulled in with that sort of challenging look, you know. No one gathered around her. She was rather forbidding, but quite wonderful looking. and people were just chatting and talking and drinking, and everything was going along nicely, when suddenly there was a noise, an explosive noise from inside the house, and everybody jumped and stopped talking. And what it was Tallulah laughing. And she burst out the door to the terrace with this laugh, which always began with a B, the letter B somehow. And I wish I could do it, but it was kind of a bah, darling, oh bah. So out she came. She made a few kind of acknowledgments of people who were there, headed straight to the bar. And she was drinking straight gin in a martini glass. Oh, and she looked absolutely stunning. She was in tight black slacks with a beautiful, bright orange cashmere sweater. Around her neck, a heavy, heavy, wide crescent, a metallic crescent. It looked rather South American or Egyptian, I guess, you know. And the straight hair, the slash of red lips, the cigarette going. Typical Tallulah, magnified 1,000 times, and it flashed through my head all the movies I'd seen starting in the 30s, all the times I'd seen her on stage and on television, you know. And I really thought perhaps I was going to pass out. I just didn't know whether I could remain standing or not. And she did all the things that she was supposed to do. In a very few moments, she had an entourage around her, mostly men, and the other women sort of floated away looking askance, but I'm sure they were envious. And there was a soldier there, and in no time at all, the soldier was sitting next to Tallulah on one of the couches, and every few minutes she would undo another button of his khaki uniform shirt. Nobody knew how he got there or where he belonged, but there he was, making quite an impression on everybody. And Tallulah would challenge everyone to drink with her so that she'd stand